Okay, so today we're just going to have a little look at how we can montage in Photoshop. This could be photo montages, different photographs, it could be mixed media, it could be stills from 3D models, or it could be sketches, or it could be a combination of all of them. I'm going to try and just go through some of the key tools you might need to use in Photoshop and different methods that you could use. So first, I just wanted to touch upon a couple of different Creative Cloud programs that you should all be using and their differences. So obviously first we've got Photoshop, which is great for image manipulation. We've got Illustrator here, so Illustrator is really good for diagrams and anything that's vector based. We'll go into vectors shortly. And then finally we've got InDesign, which you should all be using for your portfolio layout, just to give you the best looking portfolio. So today we're going to look at Photoshop. Firstly though, what is the difference between a raster image, which is what we use Photoshop for, and a vector image? So Photoshop is a raster based program. So raster images are images that are built from pixels. So you can see here tiny little coloured squares that in a great quantity can form a highly detailed image such as a photograph, and that is a raster image. Each pixel has a colour and a brightness, and the more pixels that an image has, the higher quality it will be, and vice versa. And we use raster images in Photoshop. Now, in contrast, vector images are what Adobe Illustrator uses vector-based imagery. So vector files are mathematical equations of lines and curves with fixed points on a grid to produce an image. So a vector file's mathematical formulas capture the shape, the border, and the fill colour in order to build that image. And because the mathematical formula recalibrates to any size, you can scale a vector image up and down without impacting its quality indefinitely. So here you can see, if you've ever zoomed in and in on a photograph image, you see it gets a bit kind of pixelated like that. That is raster. Whereas if we zoom in and in on a vector image, it will just continue to hold its quality, and that's what we use in Illustrator. Photoshop is raster. The other thing that's good to think about in terms of looking into Photoshop and also Illustrator and InDesign is the difference between RGB colour and CMYK colour. So RGB, red, green, blue, is an additive colour model that's used and intended. It's used for any design that's intended for a screen. So RGB captures colours by adding light. And all the colours together produce white. So if you add red, green and blue together, you get white. And this makes it ideal for digital contents like websites or videos. In contrast, CMYK, which is cyan, magenta, yellow and black, is a subtractive colour model used for physical printing. So anything you want to print physically is best in CMYK, and it creates the colours by applying ink to a surface with all the colours together producing black, which is necessary for accurate prints. The key thing to remember here is that converting RGB to CMYK can sometimes alter the appearance of the colours. So if usually in design we work in CMYK because usually we're printing, you can convert them. Sometimes there can be a little bit of a colour difference, as you can see the green there and the green there are a little bit different. But it's just something to bear in mind. Think about what's kind of the end output of the piece of work that you're doing. Okay, so let's close that down. The next thing I just wanted to touch on quickly before we start is Adobe Stock. So if you go to the web browser and type in Adobe Stock, Adobe has a great big library of images that you should have as part of your student subscription. You should have unlimited images, and it's such an amazing resource that a lot of people don't know about. So you can get everything from, let's have a look what we can get here. This one is leading. We've got some kind of watercolor images, we can get buildings. We've got buildings here. You can just get like you can get landscapes. Is it going to load? Landscapes here. We could get even materials, wood textures, things that we might need for our montages. There's just an infinite amount of images on here, and most of them are free for you to download as part of your subscription, which is absolutely brilliant. And there's also videos, loads of videos. Some of the videos you have to pay for, but other videos will be within your subscription. So it's just like a fantastic resource. One thing I would suggest if you're looking for images, one thing that I'd suggest is if you come into the filters. One thing I would suggest though is that if you come into the filters on the left hand side, I would turn off, so here you can either have it including all of their images, or you could turn off the generative AI ones. Personally, I'd exclude the generative AI ones, because what I want Adobe Stock for is for real photographs. If you don't mind having some generative AI ones in there, that's fine. But I always turn that off as I get better quality pictures. I think sometimes, I think they have to declare this, the person who's created the content, so sometimes you can see that there are some that slip through the gaps. You also get you can get vector images like this one here, and it's for Illustrator, so it's an EPS. So this is a vector based image which has got a transparent background, so you can like pop them onto other files. You can also get silhouettes, I think, of people, which is useful for montaging. So there's just it's just a brilliant resource really. You can also get trees. The trees I'll be using today have come from Adobe Stock. Yep, okay. So if we come into Photoshop, the first thing we need to do is you either set up a new file, so we go File New, and we can either set up a kind of an A4 or whatever size you want, or if you want it to be kind of a mobile or a web-based screen, we can set it up here. So I would always use 300 dpi. Usually for web screens you do 72 dpi, but print is 300. So I always do all my images in 300 dpi, and then you can always save it down to 72. Whereas if you've done it in 72, you lose some information in trying to scale it up to 300. So I always do 300 dpi, and predominantly we're going to be working in RGB color today, because this is just something that I'm going to display on a screen. You can always change this later, as I said. So I've already, instead of creating a new file, I've just opened a sketch that I've scanned in, and this is just a quick sketch that I've done of potentially this is a design idea. So today we're just going to be looking at how we can kind of elevate this hand sketch using montaging to just quickly give it a bit more life, ahead of perhaps I've got a tutorial on Friday that I want to show my tutor, and I just want to kind of enhance this sketch a little bit before then, but I've not got much time. So let's say I want to start bringing in some other media into this sketch file, to start to kind of give this sketch some life. Now there's a couple of different ways we can bring objects into this file. The way that we don't do it is to just copy and paste into this file, because we lose a lot of information doing that. So the first way is if we come into File and we come to Place Embedded here, and I come to, let's say I want to bring this silhouette of a person in. Okay, so in comes a person with a blue cross across them, and a little, in the layers tab on the right hand side here, we've got a little picture of a paper. Now what this means is that this is a smart object. So a smart object, what happens is if I kind of manipulate it bigger and smaller and keep changing it, I don't lose any quality of that object. Whereas if it was not a smart object, I'd lose a little bit of quality. Not a lot, but it's just kind of a way of maintaining quality in your image. The images that you're bringing in, if it's sometimes it's important, sometimes it's not as important depending on what you were doing. So the second way we can do that, however, with that embedded, if I was to make changes to the original file, they won't come through into this file, so it's not linked to the original file. If I wanted to bring something in and then continue to make changes to that image in the separate file, then I could come into File, Place Linked. Again, it's still a smart object, but what we can do here is if we were to open that original file and say change the color of them. So now we can see that that is changed to it's updated from this file. So if I wanted to go back to black, I save it again, and then again it's updated itself. So that's just one way that if we know we want to make changes to it, then we'd use a smart object that was linked. The problem is with smart objects, you can't use all the Photoshop features with them, and you can't apply certain features. So the downside of smart objects is that they increase the file size and they can slow down your computer, and they're less suitable for kind of one-way permanent edits where you don't expect to need to go back to change things later. And in this case, you could just use a non-smart object. So to be honest, I don't ever use smart objects. I just always use non-smart, but it's good to show you that this exists. So if I wanted to just bring in a non-smart object, and what I do for that is, so if I come and find that file. Okay, so there's two ways. We can either copy and paste, so then we go Control A, Control C, or Edit Copy, and then Control V or Edit Paste. Yeah. The problem with this way is that you lose some of the information and the quality of the file. It's fine if they're little things, but the best practice way to bring objects in from another file is if you come down to the layer here, we go right click and we duplicate the layer, and then we find the destination in here. Okay, so I've showed you 4 ways to bring objects into a different file, but the way that I always use most of the time is the right click, duplicate layer into the new file. So this way it's not a smart object. I can kind of delete like bits of it if I wanted to, which I can't do in a smart object. I can make all the adjustments to it, but it's not linked into this file, which doesn't matter for me, but it's got the most quality that I could have in it by duplicating rather than copying and pasting. Okay, so that's 4 ways of bringing in an object into our file. So we've got place embedded, which is a smart object but it's not linked. Place linked, which is a smart object that is linked to the original file. There's copy and paste, which is kind of loses the most information, and there's right click and duplicate, which is, in my opinion, the best way to do it, the best way for what you're doing. Okay, so I actually don't want that person. I was just highlighting the different ways to bring something in. So I've got another piece of tracing paper that I've scanned in with some annotations for my design on it, and I want to overlay these on top of this drawing. So to do this, we first need to look at how layers work. Some of you might be familiar with layers, others might not. So on the right hand side, you'll have your layers panel here. Now think of these as like sheets of paper. So if we create a new layer, so it's this cross here, okay, we could create several new layers here. These are all sheets of paper on top of our background one. So let's see, just to highlight, so on this layer here, I'm drawing that, and then this layer which is above it, got some blue, and then the green one at the top, got some green. So if I move the green one behind the yellow and the blue, it'll go behind. Again, if we move the blue one behind, we can't currently move any of them behind our sketch, and that's because our sketch is the background image. It's locked as the background. So firstly, if we want to put things behind our sketch, we need to double click our background, and then it becomes layer 0 and it's unlocked. Now good housekeeping is to name all your layers to make it easier when you've got hundreds of them in big, like say CGI renders. You might have hundreds of layers, so it makes it easier for you to understand. So I'm just going to call it original sketch. Okay, so I'll always know. Now we can bring these layers behind it. Obviously we can't see them because it's all a solid white. We can bring them ahead. Okay, so that is our layers. If we want to get rid of them, we can just delete them. So I'm going to come and find my annotations that I've scanned in, which are here. Okay, so these are another piece of tracing paper that I've scanned in. As you can see, it's really faded. The scanner's not really picked up enough information. So there's something we can do about this. So the next thing we're going to look at is adjustment layers. So down at the bottom, just a couple to the left of your new layer tab, we've got adjustment layers. It looks like half a circle coloured in. So I'd encourage you in your own time to play with all these different adjustment layers. They do a lot of different things, but for today, right now, we're going to probably put some levels on. There are a couple of ways you can do this, but levels looks at adjusting the balance of light and dark in an image. So you can do this by dropping the dark, sampling the whitest white in the drawing and the darkest black, or you can just do it manually. So I'm going to start to pull my black tone up, and as you can see, my drawing is the black's getting more crisp. It's crunching the black. I don't want to go too far because obviously that's too much information. I don't want that much information, so you do want to try and find like a sweet spot that seems to work. Okay, so probably about there is fine. Now as you can see, this is its own layer, so I can turn that off and on, and again it's a non-destructive edit. So my initial scan below this is still as it was. I'm not making any alterations to the existing, so I can turn that on and off. Now this level will alter anything below it, so if you've got several layers below it, it will alter anything below that one, unless if you want it to just affect this layer, then you need to hold between the adjustment layer and the layer you want to affect, and hold down the Alt key, and now it will only affect this layer. We'll go back over this again later when we've got a few more layers, so that you can see why this might be important. Okay, so now it's just affecting this layer here. Again, it doesn't matter in this one because we don't have any other layers. So now I'm gonna clean up some of the kind of the shadows that you always get from the scan bed. So I'm just going to come into my and this will be a destructive edit, but I think it's not information I'm ever going to need to get back. So if I come into my layer, I'm going to do B for brush, or the paintbrush tool here. As you can see at the moment, the paintbrush is too big, so if you just use the open and close brackets to make it smaller, you can also come into the brush settings at the top here. You can make it hard or soft. So 100% hard is I'll show you as an example. 100% hard is a solid circle. 0% is a very feathered circle. And then you can make it big or smaller. You can have different brushes. I'm just going to have a circle for now. Oops. Okay, and we want it to be white, because what we're just going to do on a really soft brush is just clear up the edges of this, just scan a little bit. I just don't want all this information. I don't think I want that either. Okay, and with it being a soft brush, if there's anything else, it'll just blend it out a little bit. Okay, now I want to bring this layer and these levels into my original sketch. Now I know that I'm never going to need to turn these levels off again. I want them to be this strong. So I want to merge these two levels together, these two layers together. So there's a couple of ways we can do this. So firstly, if you highlight the layers that you want to merge together, right click, you can go merge layers. So now this is one layer. Or if you want to merge everything in a drawing together, you just right click, merge visible. if you've got any hidden layers, it will not merge them, it'll just get rid of them, so beware. Okay, and then so that's brought them both into one layer. The other way is to go flatten image. Now this flattens all your layers into one locked background image. This can be then saved as a JPEG. Whenever you've got any kind of a Photoshop file that's not flattened with a lock symbol, you'll only be able to save it as like a TIFF or a PSD, but never a JPEG. So if you're wondering why you can't save something as a JPEG, you need to flatten it. That flattens all the information down. For this, it doesn't matter whether it's merged or flattened, because all we're going to do is right click, we're going to duplicate the layer, we're going to duplicate it into our sketch base file. Okay, and I'm just going to shut that down because I don't need it now. So we've now got our annotation on top of our building, but unfortunately we can't see our building because they're both solid white scans. So how are we going to kind of blend these together in a way where we can see both of the layers together like it was tracing paper? Well, to do this we need to start looking at blending options. So again, in our layers panel here, just above our layers, we've got a little box here that should probably currently say normal. Okay, so if we click on this, this is our adjustment layers. So what this does is it blends together two or more, it blends together the top layer with anything below it based on colours. So the way I'm gonna to make it easier to understand this, because black and white, a lot of these blending options don't work. So I'm just gonna hide that levels at the moment. I'm gonna create a new layer here. I'm gonna colour it maybe like a blue over green. So I've got this solid colour here. Now if I come into my blending options, again, some of them still don't do anything, but some of them you'll see that it's how the green then interacts with the layer behind, which is obviously black. So this is quite a good way. If you've got a black and white line drawing, you can change the colour of the line drawing just by putting a fill layer over the top and playing with the blending options. If you can see here, so there's all different ones. There's like difference, exclusion, and this basically then alters the way that two layers are blending together. I'm also going to show you this in a different file that's like a full photo file, because I think it makes it a bit easier to see. So let's just go with, not that one, so let's just go with let's just say we've got this image here. Let's just say we want to blend it with another image. So let me open another image here. Okay, I'm going to duplicate this one over the top of the other one. These are all from Adobe Stock, by the way. Okay, now we've got a lot of different colours going on. It might be easier for you to see how these layers blend together. So I've got my top layer selected. I can just move through these, and can you see how depending on which of the blending options you use, it uses the light and the dark and the different colours to blend in different ways. So it's worth having a play around with these to see which ones kind of work for what you're trying to do. Yeah, okay, so we come back to our sketch, we turn on our annotations. I'm just going to call that annotations. Okay, now for black and white, usually multiply is the best thing to use, so I'm going to use that multiply. And then they're kind of in the wrong place. I want them to be, they've not been scanned in the right place, so I need to move them. So to do this, I go Control T, which is transform, and then I can just, you can see I've got this blue marquee come over my drawing, and then I can either drag it or I can use the left, up, down and right keys on the keyboard. I'm going to kind of drag it into the place where I think it needs to be nearish. Okay, it's probably like near enough, right? Okay, and then it's enter to confirm. If I needed to make it bigger or smaller, I could just pull down on these anchor points. This will give me a uniform transformation. If I wanted it to be non-uniform, I just need to hold down shift as I'm moving it around. If I wanted it to be like a perspective transform, then we can look at that later on in the tutorial. But it's actually at the right size for me at the moment, so I don't need to worry about that. Okay, now I've brought it in, I kind of think that the annotations are a little bit stronger than I wanted them to be. So what we can do here is now look at the opacity. So the opacity is how much of the layer is showing. So if it's at 0, obviously you can't see anything. 28 is a bit stronger, and then 100 is completely opaque. So you can either use the slider or you can dial it in, whatever, for more accuracy. Okay, so I've got some annotations and I've got my original sketch. So now what I would quite like to do is I've got like some graph paper that I want to, again from Adobe Stock, so I want to overlay this graph paper over the sketch as well, to make it look more like I sketched it on some graph paper. So in it comes, it's too big, so that's Control T, and then that's Control plus and minus zooms in and out. It's really important to start to get to use the keyboard shortcuts because it saves a lot of time. So it's too big, so I'm just going to scale it down to the right size. It's really helpful as well in the later versions of Photoshop that if you hold down shift, you'll get kind of a really helpful magenta guidelines to help you to make sure it's horizontal. I'm going to click enter. Again, I want this to be, I want to blend this over, so again, probably multiply on that one. And it's like way too strong, and I also don't want the blue. I think I just want it to be a grey graph paper. So we need to try and take out the colour out of this graph paper. So in order to understand how we can, there's a couple of different ways that we can make coloured images black and white, and again we're going to now look at these different options. So to look at that, I'm going to come into this image just because it's a full colour image. It's a lot easier to try and explain the concept of colour when it's a full colour image. So let's say I wanted to make this picture black and white. Again, using non-destructive edits, there's a couple of different options we can go for. So if we come back down to the adjustments tab down here, and we look down here, one of them is black and white, which straight away is turned at black and white. This option keeps the colour intensity in the blacks and the whites a lot more than the second option I'm going to show you, but you obviously got not as much control over how desaturated it is, because it's not desaturated, it's just been turned black and white. Again, we can turn it on and off. You can also, we'll go into shortly, but with all adjustment layers, they've got a mask on them, so you could make some of it the full colour and some of it black and white, which we will go on to the masks shortly, but just showing that you do have that option with every adjustment layer. And then also you can just delete the layer if you just change your mind, or you can just turn it off if you change your mind. So you've got a lot of flexibility with adjustment layers that should definitely play around with these. So that's one way, just using a black and white adjustment layer. The second way, is to use hue and saturation here. So what this will do is you can desaturate it by like like not fully, so you can see it just becomes desaturated and then completely desaturated. You can also play around with the lightness and the darkness of it. but it kind of, you lose a lot of the detail, the darks and the lights. Desaturate it like that. You can also play around with the hues using this, so you can create some quite funky effects using hue saturation. So this is another way to make it completely desaturated, but it doesn't keep the overall colour intensity of the black and white, but it might not matter for what you're doing. It depends on what you're doing. So I'm going to come back to my original sketch. I'm going to create I'm just going to show you one thing when I'm doing this that we talked about before. It's going to add another layer in here. It's going to make that layer completely turquoise. So when I now want to add a desaturation or a black and white to my graph paper, I put the black and white in, and as you can see, it's made all the layers below it black and white. Even my green layer has become black and white. So that's when I said that an adjustment layer will affect everything below it unless it's tied to a specific layer or it's in a group, which we'll also go into. So I just want this black and white to affect just my background, my graph paper. So I hold down between the two of them, I hold Alt, and I'll get this little arrow. And now it's just affecting my graph paper and nothing else. Okay. And I'm gonna knock that back maybe to like 50%, maybe a bit more, like 40%. I just want it to be like a little bit there. Okay. And you know what? Because you could end up with like I could end up with like loads and loads of layers here, and the more layers, the heavier the file. So I know that I'm not going to want that to be blue again. So I'm just going to hold down Shift, highlight both of the layers, right click, and I'm going to merge these two layers. Yep. And I'm going to call this graph paper. Okay, so I've got my graph paper. Oops. Okay, so and then I'm just going to rename this as graph paper. So I've got my graph paper, I've got my annotations, and I've got my original sketch. Okay, so the next thing I want it's all very black and white at the moment. I do want a little bit of colour in there. So I want to colour my windows in, I think, just to give it a pop of colour. So how can we do this? So first we need to select our windows. So there's a couple of ways we can do this. Make sure that you're on the right layer. And we're going to come in firstly, and we're going to start to look at how we can select some of these windows. So I'll show you a couple of examples of how we can select within this file, and then I'll show you a couple in our other example file. So the first selection tool that we want to look at is the polygonal lasso. So that is on the left hand side on our toolbar here, 3 down. You can see like what looks like kind of a pointed shape here, and that is our polygonal lasso tool. Okay, so what this lasso tool does is you just start clicking wherever you want to select whatever shape you want, double click to close, and then it'll connect this closed loop together, and you've got a selection which you could then, let's say we create a new layer here, we could fill that with a colour, so green perhaps. You can also, instead of having to press the paint bucket, you can just do Alt backspace and we can fill that in. Okay, and then Control D deselects. The second way that we could select a window is we will right click on the polygonal lasso tool and we go for the magnetic lasso tool. What this will do is it will kind of use the geometry in the image to guess where the edge that you're trying to get is. You can see it's kind of doing this edge here. Oops. It does its best trying to stick to what the line it thinks you're trying to get is, and then double click to close, and again Alt backspace. That's the second way that I can fill in my windows. The third way that I can is with the magic wand tool, so that's just a W, so that's the magic wand here, and then I just click in like a closed space on my original. You have to be on the right layer, on the original sketch. Click on like a closed space here, and again I go into my layer, fill that in. Depending on the tolerance, so if it has a tolerance of like 10, it won't be as generous with its selection, but if you go to like 100, it will kind of select more, but so it's selected more, but sometimes it can go too far. So again, I can fill that one in. And then the fourth way is that we can select by colour. So again, on our original sketch, we can go select colour range. We want just the whites, and as you can see here, you can tone up and down how much of the white it's going to select, but as you can see now, basically selected all the white in our drawing, of which there is a lot. I'll show you how this works it's a bit easier to see that colour range one in this example because there is more colour. So if we went to select colour range and we wanted just the blue, as you can see, it's now, you've got to see how much kind of fuzziness you want. So if it's quite low, it's only going to pick that very blue, whereas if it's quite high, it's going to start to pick out tones of blue in the actual building, whereas we want it kind of in the middle and it's just selecting the sky. And if we just magic wand did that, here it had a tolerance of like 10, see, it's only going to pick just similar tones of blue. But we went to like 100, it's going to pick all the blue, but sometimes in some examples it might go too far. So it depends what you're kind of looking at. Whilst we're on this image and talking about selections, I just want to talk you through this little kind of little bar that keeps coming up here. So this is the Firefly toolbar. So this is our AI tools, and they've only come out in the beta version a couple of years ago, and they're definitely getting better and better, but they are really helpful now. So just gonna, whilst we're here, talk about these. So one thing that we could do, so let's just unlock that. This has a quite cool remove background feature, where firstly, if you click remove background, it will kind of do its best to guess what the background of the image is, and it will mask that off. So again, we'll go through masks shortly, but this is a non-destructive edit, so you can just delete that mask off and you've got it back. Yeah, you can also, if it goes too far, again we'll talk about masks shortly, but you can paint back in the bits that it's kind of made a mistake with. But it's a really quick way, rather than having to if you're just wanting to get rid of the sky on your building, rather than having to kind of lasso around the whole building or try and cut the building out, now with Firefly we can just ask it to remove the background. A second thing that we'll just go over, seeing as we're here, is that you can also get it to add or change or move things generatively in your image. So if I create a marquee, so it's M for marquee, or just this marquee here, marquee selection, let's say I don't want this brush anymore, I want to get rid of it. So I can either click the remove, or I can gonna say what do you want to do, so remove bush. Okay, so it will give me like 3 different, and you can be really descriptive in that, just like you would be in Midjourney. And what I'd do is just give me some generative image for just that little area of my image. Yeah, so here it's given me 3 options. So that's the first one, that's the second one, and that's the third one. So again, it's not altered the original, it's non-destructive, so the original image is still safe and sound, but what it's done is created a layer over the top that it's just a generative image removing that bush, and it's masked that. So what we could do is, if we say like this area here, it's kind of created these weird little pedestals that I don't want. So I can go into the mask and I can edit them out, do a bit of extra tidying up. Sometimes it works really well, sometimes you'll ask it to remove something and it will put like a pineapple in its place or something like that. Again, like say we say like add person sitting on the bench. No idea whether it will do this, but it might. Let's see. So it's giving you like 3 options, kind of ropey options, but you know, it's a quick way of populating your images with people. So it's definitely worth playing around with this Firefly tab here. Coming back to our image, so that's the four ways we can select. We can use polygonal lasso tool, magnetic lasso tool, and we can use the magic wand tool, or we can select by color range. There's other ways too, but they're kind of the ones you'll use most. So let's say I've over here, I'm gonna use the polygonal lasso tool, not the magnetic one. I'm just gonna select. I can be quite rough with it because I've got black, so I can use that multiply blending option so you won't see if I've gone over the lines a little bit. You'll see what I mean shortly. So let's go back in here. Oh no, I've lost that the colour green that I was using before. So let's say like that's on my glass. Maybe I want to get this a little bit there too. Okay, so I've selected on my glass. I've made it a colour, the different colours, and I could put it on like a multiply blending mode, but this isn't giving me like a lot. It's if I wanted to like change the colour now, let's say I've just realised that I wanted these to be all be this green colour and they're all different colours, because all I've got in that layer now is just these little bits of colour. So it's not the best way of colouring in Windows. So a better way would be to create a mask and put a layer and put that mask on a layer. So I'll show you what I mean by this. Right, so because I've already selected those bits are already selected, if I click Control, actually no, we're going to do it differently. So instead, what I'm going to do is create a new layer. I'm going to make that blue. I'm going to make it, put it on multiply. Okay, so this is my glass. And what I want to do is I'm going to mask off just the glazed areas. So to do this, we need to use the mask tool. So I'm going to start by just selecting one of the windows, or maybe if you hold Shift and keep clicking, you can select loads of different bits. So let's say just these 4 for now. Okay. So I want to mask off this glass, so it's just these areas. So with my selection highlighted, I click on the layer I want to mask, and then I click this mask button here. So that's like a square with a circle in it. Click that, and what happens is basically this layer's been masked so that only these areas can show. And we've got a thumbnail here. This is the layer, this is the mask. So here you can see everything's black, and then there's little bits of white. So if it's black, it will not show. If it's white, it will show. So how can we add to this mask? So we can either use our selection, so we say we want to take, oops, what have I done there? Say I want to select this balcony here. Okay, so I've got a solid selection there, so I can either fill this in using the paint bucket, or, and I need to be on white, fill this in using the paint bucket, or I can go Alt Backspace, which also fills it in. And we need to be on white because if it's white, it will show. If it's black, it will not show. So I want to be adding white to it and taking away black. So I've got my added one there. A second way to do it instead of a selection is with a paintbrush. So I've got B for paintbrush, or the paintbrush button there, make it smaller. We've got our white, so I'll make that solid. So I'm starting to show, starting to paint the mask, and as you can see, as we add to it, you can see in the thumbnail we're adding to the mask. Let's say, oh, I've got a bit too far over there, so then I just need to turn it back to black, this bit. So to do that, we either reverse the paint bucket, reverse the swatches, or we press X to reverse the swatches. So I'm on black again. Also, if you want to paint in a straight line, you click once, hold shift down and click again, and it'll paint you a straight line. So you can paint bucket, you can fill using lassos or polygonal lassos or whatever you want to do. So I'm just going to go around adding all the glazing to this mask. It doesn't need to be perfect, so we're just doing this as a, by the way, this image is probably going to be quite random in the end because I'm just trying to show a few different techniques rather than making a good montage. So it's just to kind of give an idea of different tools and techniques rather than what looks good as a whole composition. Okay, so I've now got all my glass. I want to deselect that, get out of that, so it's Control D to get rid of that. I'm going to save as well at this point, so I'm going to save, and you want to be saving as I'd already saved, but you want to save as a Photoshop file, so that, let's say I was saving this for the first time, you want to be a Photoshop file, because Photoshop files will keep all your layers. If you try to save it as a JPEG, what it'll do is it'll flatten all the layers down, which is when it's like this, and then there's nothing we can't get any of those, we can't change any of those layers because they're gone. So you want to be saving as a Photoshop file at all times. Okay, so now the fact that we've got this on a mask, what it basically means is that we could change this, we could change the colour of this at any point if we wanted to. We could like paint on this if we wanted to, and we don't have to like change our selection again because our selection is like always going to be there. The next thing I want to do is maybe I want to add some like reflections into our glass a little bit to give it a bit of like realism. Maybe I want to play with kind of real and sketch together. So I want to bring in another, I'm going to bring in another file. Maybe I want to bring in these reflections here. Again, I'm going to right click and I'm going to duplicate that into my sketch space. I shut it down. It's massive, so I'm going to make it quite small. Maybe I just want it in like this kind of area here, and I just want it to be in the window shape. So because what I could do is I could control and click the whenever you want to check what your mask is, if you control and click on the mask, then it will select all that mask. The other thing to just note here is that when the mask is highlighted, so you've got a white halo around the mask, that is you editing the mask. So if I'm on that, I can change the mask. If you want to edit the actual layer, then the white halo is around the layer side, and that is when you're editing the layer. So be careful not to be thinking that you're changing a mask, but you're actually colouring in the picture behind it. and vice versa. Okay, but what I could do is I could control click, select everything on that one, and then I could mask the windows as well. But then we're going to end up with basically loads of layers with loads of masks. A cleaner way to do it is that if I instead create a folder, and I might call it like glass, and I'm going to put everything to do with the glass inside this folder. So now it's all in that folder. I can turn the whole folder off and on together, and I'm going to move that mask onto the folder. So now, rather than in the individual layers being masked, the whole folder, so everything that goes within here is going to have that mask on it. And it's a way of just adding everything to do with glazing to one folder, and it's a cleaner structure, and then you've not got millions of masks to deal with. If I wanted to change the mask of the glass, I don't need to then change every single layer. I can just change the group. Okay, so let's say I want to put this glass in, but I want it to be like quite kind of knocked back, so play maybe the screen ones might be quite good. Maybe I'm going to make it like 50 or 60%. I want to duplicate it. It's only going to be quite like abstract, so I'm just going to drag. To duplicate a layer, you could just duplicate, but then you can just duplicate it like this, or you can just drag down on the plus and it'll like duplicate it for you, and then Control T to transform it. It's going to pull it across like that. Maybe I want like some trees at the top, so I might just sample a bit of this image here, perhaps. Yeah, like I might sample this bit here. I'm going to crop this down and put it in my other folder. Okay, as you can see it's massive, so let's make it kind of smaller like that. Maybe I want it like there to show some kind of trees and stuff, and maybe I also want it over here. Now over here you can see that it's coming into this bottom bit, which I don't want it to do. So even though I've got a mask on my group for the whole of the glass, I'm also going to just mask off this picture itself to get rid of it at the bottom. Okay, so you can mask a group and a layer individually. Let's just make that screen as well, maybe like 50 on screen. Okay, so then I've got some like abstract kind of coloured glazing in there. Now maybe I want to hint at some of the other materials. Maybe I want to hint at this this kind of wood cladding here. I'm just going to save. So I want to bring in a wood texture. Where can we get wood textures from? You can get in that Adobe stock that I showed you, we have wood. The other place that is good to get textures is 3D textures, which is actually now just called textures.com. It's this one with the little blue cube. This is really, I've used this for like probably 15 years. I used to use these materials in industry as well. They're really good, and you can get quite a lot with a free account too. So ones they have like wood, and they've recently changed like the way they show it to be like more, obviously it's more aimed at render programs, because if you come into, let's say, if you come into a material, it will give you a seamless texture, so there's no tiling, and then it'll give you the normal map and the bump map and everything that you put into V-Ray or whatever rendering program you are. But what if you can just have just the image, so you can download it. These some of them are free, some of them are you have to pay for. It depends which one, but you can get enough free ones that you shouldn't have to pay. Another one that's really useful that I use all the time. I actually use these in plans a lot. So when I was at uni, so they're called grunge maps. Here they are. Okay, so there's some of these. They're just like kind of grungy textures, But if you put them behind a drawing, like a plan or even a diagram, and then knock them back, using our blending options, you can get some really interesting effects, just like really kind of abstract effects, and also you can give the idea of different papers, different textures. I blend them into shadows in like axonometric drawings. They're really cool little textures that you can use, and a lot of them are seamless, which means you can just repeat them and repeat them and you don't get a line down them, which is really, really helpful. Okay, so I've already got a wood paneling. I don't need it to be seamless, so that's where it's a square, and if I was to like mirror it, you won't see the line. That's what we mean by seamless. So I'm just gonna duplicate this layer into our sketch base. Okay, I'm gonna call it cladding. Obviously it's massive. Now I can transform this up and down, but I also want to like transform it so that it's kind of matches the perspective of my drawing. So to do this, basically you can either hold down, when you hold down Control and click one of these nodal points, it will now let me move it kind of perspectively rather than uniformly. So I can either do it the best I can like that, or you can scale, distort. You can use these kind of presets here, scale, distort, perspective, and it'll kind of like do it like that, but I just prefer to retransform it. So we're gonna, again, it does not need to be perfect, but we're just gonna select, follow our kind of perspective there, and again we want it to match the image, so I'm just going to turn off that for a minute so that I can see. I'm going to lasso. It's not perfect, obviously with more time you can do perfect masks. I'm going to mask that, and then I'm going to come down and see what kind of a mask looks like. It's what I want. It probably is, again, multiply again, yeah, multiply again, and I want it to be like really faded, so maybe like 50%, something like that. I've also kind of noticed here that whereas in the glazing, which one is it? Whereas like the blue, with the blending mode of the blue, you can't see that it overlaps. The black, the reflections do. So what I could do if I was really bothered by it is I could select all that, and I could add that from the mask like that, just tidy it up a bit. But for this kind of a montage, it doesn't really matter. Okay, so I've got that in there. What about finally if I wanted to bring in like a precast concrete? I'm going to duplicate that over. It's come into the wrong bit, so maybe which bit do I want to be concrete? Maybe like this wall here. And B, you can just nudge it up and down as well. Again, I'm going to kind of use my magic wand this time to select all of that bit, and then I'm going to mask it off, and then maybe I'm going to multiply it like 50, something like that. Maybe I don't want as much. Okay, so that's a way that we can kind of use different hint at some materials. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm just going to come in with the original sketch selected. I'm just going to magic wand all these kind of black lines on a shift. If you hold down shift, it should select them all at once. We'll keep the select. You can add to the selection. So I've got all my black lines. I'm just going to add that to the mask. There we go. Whoop. Okay. So I'm getting too precious here. It's only a little sketch. So we've added some material hints at materials. We've added some colours. Let's look at how we could let's bring in look at maybe doing something a bit more abstract now. So let's bring in like a bit of an abstract floor in this area. So let's see. This time I'm going to bring in these really cool watercolors that I found on Adobe Stock. So we've got this one, and maybe it's hinting at water, something like that. Let's shut down some of these. We don't need these. Again, because it's come into the glass file, the glass folder, it's come into the glass, which actually looks really cool, but we don't want it there. So I'm going to pull it out of there and into here. So let's say I want this like path here. Maybe it's a path. Maybe it's actually some kind of water feature. Who knows? So what we could do here is if we could like move this kind of horizontal, in like a horizontal line, like that perhaps. Yeah. Make that multiply again, and then I'm gonna can't select that. So maybe I'm just gonna brush this. This time I'm gonna start with it all showing. I'm just gonna get rid of like bits that I don't want. If you hold down, click and hold down shift as you paint, it'll draw straight lines between the two places. So you're clicking, and then like maybe we'd want to just blend it out at the edges. So we go to a really soft brush, and we kind of just we want to do something like, again, the firefly is showing us that we could like use AI to help to add and subtract from the mask, if that's helpful. I have not used that yet. Okay, so we've got that. Now what about if I actually want that to be like pink or something like that? What we could do is we could use some adjustment layers to change that. So if we come into here and we look at hue, saturation and color balance and what they both do. So let's start with hue, saturation, and we want it to just affect this layer. So we hold down Alt between them, so it's just on this one. So we could kind of, what we can do is we can colorize that layer, and we can alter the colors using hue, saturation. The other one we can use is color balance, which is kind of a bit more targeted. Basically you can just target kind of the reds, the greens, the cyans to manipulate the colours in an image. The other way we can change colours of things, which might be better to highlight in here, is that we can just do like one colour wash over the top, let's say red, and then play with the blending modes, which can colour an image. You see, using just the blending modes, we can change the colour of something using a solid layer of colour, and then perhaps putting it on multiply, something like that. So again, we could do that here, but actually I've decided I quite like the colours, so I'm going to keep them like that. Let's say I've also got like a watercolour one, a pinky one. And this one over here maybe. And this time I'm just going to draw the masking using a big fat paintbrush on the white. And then I want to blend it out of the sides. Okay, and let's say actually I do want this to just be green like grass, so I'm gonna maybe go for a hue saturation. Gonna maybe make it like a darky green, a desaturated darky green maybe. I'm gonna knock that back to like maybe 70%. Okay, so that's ways we can add colour washes to things. Let's say we could as well, like if we add a whole red to the whole thing. Again, with the blending options, you can get some really interesting effects just using like a colour wash. So they're definitely worth playing with. Okay, but I don't want to do that. I'm going to delete that. Okay, so I've got, I'm just gonna, what else am I going to do? I might just bring in another of my, maybe I'm going to bring in another concrete. So maybe I've got a couple of walls in there, and I'm going to knock that back a little bit, maybe to like 80%. Okay, just to try and start to ground it, perhaps. Okay, so now one other thing when we're talking about a paintbrush that I'll just bring up is like that we can use different brushes. So if we come to our window, you can bring up your brushes and your brush settings, so you can get some, like you can get all sorts of different brushes, and you can get like wet media ones, special effect ones, you can load in more, but you know, you could start to create different kind of patterns that might be quite helpful in terms of creating kind of more kind of graphic diagrams, things like that. Just something to play around with. That wasn't the best example. Okay, so we've got some colour, we've got some annotations, we've got a bit of a hint of the kind of the materials that we wanted to go for. And the next thing that we could do is bring in like some trees and some sky. So firstly, again in Adobe Stock, you can get like watercolour trees that are really helpful. And you can also download files that are called like .ai, so they are Illustrator files. They're vector-based files, but you can open them in Photoshop. So I bring this Illustrator file from Adobe Stock into Photoshop. Basically, you can see that this is all a transparent background, which is great when I want to start to bring them layer up some trees in my file. So for what we're doing, I can just copy and paste these in, but you probably just want to individually duplicate them. Right, so I'm going to create, because I'm going to have quite a few trees, I'm just going to call these, I'm going to create a folder called trees. I'm going to put all the trees in the tree folder. So let's say they're kind of like, maybe I want them like behind the building. Let's see, let's bring in a couple more. Some, yeah, like at the back there. I'm going to start to like layer this up a little bit. And we can look at like the layer order in a second. Let's just get like a couple more. This is obviously super quick, you can do it a lot better. Okay, so let's just duplicate them for effect. So what we can do here is we can start to layer up trees, and we can, if we put them all in this tree folder. Oh, I've got another group there, I don't want that other group. So these are all in this tree folder, and we can like play around with the opacity of them, so maybe they're all like 60% and they all kind of overlap. What else we could do is we could start to like mask them, or you could put them on a multiply layer so you can see some of the stuff in the background, or it could be that we have some in the background and some in the foreground. So to do that, what we could do is move them into two different folders. So trees around. So I want these in the background. So what I want to do for this is mask out my building. Um, and what happens is if you've masked a group, whatever you do to the layers within the group, like if you move them around or whatever, they don't, the mask isn't affected, so it's quite helpful. So they're in the background, and then maybe we've got trees foreground. Maybe they're not multiply, maybe they're just normal. Maybe that one is as well. If you're searching for a layer, if you've got your selection tool on, you can just right click and it'll tell you some layers it could be, which is why it's really helpful to name them. Like if you've named it tree or whatever, then you'll be able to see which one it is. I actually decided I want that one in the background layer, so again you can just move it straight away. And because it's in the background, I might make it like 70% or whatever. Maybe I'll make them all 80%. Just starting to play around with kind of depth. Sometimes quite nice with sketchy trees to like make them all a little bit opaque, because when you start to lay them together, then you can get some really nice effects. Obviously, if we have more time. But you know, okay, so starting to play around with trees, we can bring in some people like we did before. So let's try and find, did I have a silhouette? Yeah, so I've got some people. A great place to find people. Again, Adobe Stock's got some. And then also there's a website called Non-Scandinavia. It's got some really great people in it. They've actually updated it a lot more recently, but you can get loads of people in here. I'm just going to use some silhouettes for today, but obviously you could use whatever you wanted to use. So we're going to duplicate these into my sketch base. Don't want them in any of my trees. So maybe you just want them like there. Okay, and then so we can see what we've got so far. We've got original sketch, we've got our annotations, graph paper, and then we've got a whole host of different things we can add into this. Obviously with more time you can make it look a lot better than I have. Okay, the last thing I want to look at is a sky. How can we bring in a sky? Okay, so if we'd masked the original sketch, we could just drop that sky like behind it, which we might do. Yeah, we'll see. So again, you can get skies from Adobe Stock. We're going to do two different skies. So let's say I've just got like this sky I want to bring in. I'm going to duplicate it in. Okay. So where do I want my sky to go? So to start with, what about if we put it behind the original sketch? What we have to do is mask out the sky out of the sketch. So let's do that so that it's behind all the other layers. So I'm not going to do that for this one. What I'm just going to do is I'm just going to select all the white. I'm going to mask it out. I'm going to put it at the bottom there. Now there's a little bit of cleaning to be done. So you can see that also what we've got, because all of our trees are on multiply, it means that there's a bit of an overlap between the trees and the sky. So we can just add basically all those trees to that sky mask. So we control click every single tree and add it to the sky mask. Okay. So we could have some kind of like sky. Obviously this sky doesn't see the picture at all, but maybe it's like a really light sky, just a hint of a sky. You could change the colour of the sky. The other type of sky that we can look at is like more of a graphical sky. So to do this, we're going to create a pattern. I'm just going to save that for now. And what's important is I want the sky to be in a mask, so I'm going to add that mask to a group called sky. I'm going to put that sky in the group so that I could add a different sky into the group and still not have to redo that mask. So yeah, let's start by creating a pattern. So to do this, we need to create a new drawing. I want my artwork to be tiny, so 50 pixels by 50 pixels, and I want it to be a transparent background, so it's going to be completely transparent. I've got this tiny little board here. Okay, go away. So I want to come to my line tool here, line tool in the shapes. I want to create a horizontal line across, well, like a cross hatch line across the artboard. So if I hold down in one corner and I click shift, it'll give me kind of that horizontal line. It's bang in the middle. Yeah, I want it to be 18 pixels. That's what I had it on. That's good. I'm going to duplicate this, drag it onto the plus, and now if I come into filter and you come to other, offset, it's going to ask me if I want to convert it to a smart object. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, and now I want to offset it so it's half the width of this artboard. So if it's 50 by 50, I wanted to offset it by 25 and 25, yeah, with repeated pixels. That's giving me another one on the side. And I'm going to repeat that process. On the other side, so now it needs to be minus 25 by minus 25. Okay, so that's giving me a hint of a crosshatch pattern, but if you imagine that this is repeated and mirrored and duplicated, it's going to give me a crosshatch. So I want to go edit, define pattern. I'm going to call it Hannah's crosshatch. Okay, can shut that down now. So if we come back to my sketch base, instead of creating a sky that's an image, I could create a pattern. So to do this, we go into the adjustment layers, and instead of creating a solid color, we want to create a pattern. Now it's asking me now, what do you want your pattern to be? And there's some pre-saved patterns in here, trees, grass, there's loads you can load in. This is my pattern from before, this one there, and that we've just created. And that is giving us this like crosshatch pattern, and we can change the scale of that if we wanted it to be like thinner or thicker. Let's say like 80%. Okay, so this is, we've got this crosshatch pattern film, and if I drag that into my sky layer mask, I just need to get rid of the rest of the ground that we didn't do before. Add that to the layer. Okay, so we've got like a crosshatch pattern that we could use for our sky instead. Say I actually want it to be like maybe 60%. Okay, and what if I, obviously I don't want it to be black, so what could I do instead? I could add an adjustment layer in there that's maybe like a bluey colour, and if I, you know, when we hover over it, we can see that now it's just affecting this pattern fill. Say I want it to be a bit lighter, so maybe we've got like a blue, and let's make that multiply. So now we've got like a little blue, kind of more of a graphical sky. And then what else we could do is actually we could add other shapes to this. So if we create like an ellipse tool, we create like a circle. And let's say I want my circle to be maybe yellow. Okay. I could actually add that to this pattern as well. So, you know, you can start to create, instead of creating kind of like photoreal montages, you can start to create more kind of geometric montages. And actually one thing that we could do, these trees don't really suit this style, so what we could do is we could merge all the trees together. We merge these two layers together, and then if we select and hover, we get just the mask of those, and we could add that to a mask. And then what we could do, hide that one, and in there we could come into that and create another of our crosshatch patterns. And what was it before? I think it was on 60%. Yeah. Okay. And then maybe we could make them like green. So then you're kind of starting to get like more of a geometric style perhaps. And you could even like change that up a bit. Yeah, so there's loads of ways you can go with this. Loads of ways you can make it realistic or not realistic or a bit of everything. But I hope that gave you a good idea of how you can use different Photoshop tools to create montages or just enhance sketches.